In New York, this is Democracy Now!
I joined the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the Vice President to remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment. If the Vice President and Cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment.
Calls are growing for President Trump to resign or be removed from office for inciting supporters to storm the Capitol in an act of insurrection that left 5 dead, including a Capitol Hill police officer. We'll speak to a congressman who took cover. Then we'll look at President-elect Joe Biden's pick to head the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, the judge who Republicans denied a seat on the Supreme Court 5 years ago.
As everyone who watched yesterday's events in Washington now understands, if they did not understand before, the rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy.
Then more than 4,000 Americans died from COVID-19 Thursday, in the deadliest day of the pandemic anywhere in the world so far. We'll speak to Rebecca Jones, a data scientist who was forced to resign as the lead software developer for Florida's coronavirus data portal after she refused to censor information about Florida's COVID-19 outbreak. Last month, armed police raided her home.
Police, come down now! Bring them down the stairs!
My children! He just pointed a gun at my children!
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The United States death toll from COVID-19 topped 4,000 for the first time on Thursday, setting yet another daily world record as top public health official Dr. Anthony Fauci warned the U.S. outbreak will get even worse in the weeks ahead. Arizona is now one of the worst affected parts of the world, with nearly 1% of state residents testing positive for coronavirus in just the past week. In California, the National Guard's assisting Los Angeles County's coroner's office after morgues and mortuaries ran out of storage space for COVID-19 victims. The CDC reported Thursday asymptomatic carriers of coronavirus are responsible for more than half of new infections, a finding that bolsters the urgent need for masks and social distancing. Meanwhile, new research published in the journal Science Immunology shows about 9 out of 10 people have robust immunity to coronavirus 8 months after an infection. It's not yet known if immunity wanes after a longer interval. President Trump said Thursday there would be an orderly transition of government January 20th, though he refused to admit he lost the election to Joe Biden. Trump's concession came in a scripted video statement one day after he incited a mob of thousands to march on Congress to overturn the election results.
Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem. I immediately deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to secure the building and expel the intruders. America is and must always be a nation of law and order.
In fact, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan says he repeatedly tried to get permission to deploy National Guard troops to assist at the Capitol Wednesday afternoon after receiving a panicked call from congressional leaders who'd fled to a secure location. He said he was thwarted for over an hour and a half before Pentagon leaders finally allowed him to send in troops. The New York Times reports Trump took no action to authorize the National Guard deployment, with Vice President Mike Pence finally intervening after he was evacuated from the Capitol. On Thursday, President-elect Joe Biden drew comparisons between Trump's crackdown on peaceful protests for Black lives and Wednesday's assault on the Capitol.
No one can tell me that if had been a group of Black Lives Matter protesting yesterday, they wouldn't have been treated very, very differently than the mob of thugs that stormed the Capitol.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Thursday she would consider a vote on whether to impeach President Trump if members of his cabinet and Vice President Pence fail to immediately remove him from power under the 25th Amendment. Pelosi formally adjourned the House of Representatives until after Biden's inauguration, January 20th, so any vote on impeachment would require that lawmakers return to Washington. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has adjourned the Senate until January 19th. The United States Capitol Police announced Officer Brian Sicknick, who was hospitalized after Trump's mob attacked him, died of his injuries Thursday evening. The 42-year-old had been on life support. He was one of 50 police officers reportedly injured by marauders on Wednesday. Police arrested just 26 people on Capitol Hill during the insurrection. On Thursday, Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund said he would quit effective January 16th. Also Thursday, congressional leaders ousted the sergeants at arms of both the House and the Senate. The top federal prosecutor for Washington, D.C., Thursday refused to rule out criminal charges against Donald Trump for inciting Wednesday's riot on Capitol Hill. Acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin said Trump and others could face charges ranging from seditious conspiracy to rioting to insurrection. Sherwin also said prosecutors will charge any Capitol police officers found to be complicit with the rioters. Officers were filmed pulling barricades aside, holding hands with insurrectionists, and even posing for a selfie after they smashed their way into the Capitol. As the insurrectionists stormed the U.S. Capitol Wednesday, hundreds of fervent Trump supporters gathered for local rallies around the country. In Los Angeles, police are investigating after images circulated of a Trump mob attacking a black woman near Los Angeles City Hall. The young woman, Berlinda Nebo, was walking home when she came upon the rally and started documenting it on her phone. Dozens quickly surrounded her, demanding to know who she voted for and to take off her face mask. She was then brutally attacked by the group of white supremacists who shoved her, pulled out her hair extensions, and pepper sprayed her in the eyes. The bearded man pictured holding her from behind was one of several witnesses who intervened to help Nebo escape the out-of-control mob. Public health officials fear Wednesday's insurrection at the U.S. Capitol was a likely coronavirus superspreader event. Few of the marauders wore masks, and many of them celebrated their refusal to follow public health guidelines. This is far-right podcast host Clay Clark speaking at a rally of Trump supporters in Washington Tuesday.
Turn to the person next to you and give them a hug. Someone you don't know. Go hug somebody. Go ahead and spread it out. Mass spreader. It's a mass spreader event. It's a mass spreader event. It's a mass spreader event.
In international news, southern Africa is seeing a regional surge in coronavirus cases following a second wave in South Africa linked to a variant that many scientists believe is far more infectious. South Africa's confirmed cases have topped 1.1 million with over 31,000 deaths. A Johannesburg nurse described the dire situation.
Our mortuaries, as I speak to you, are full to capacity. In fact, it's in the longest where we've seen, body bags on the floor.
Brazil's COVID-19 deaths have topped 200,000, the second highest death toll after the U.S. as health officials resist a lockdown amidst an intense surge. Japan's declared a one-month state of emergency in and around Tokyo as cases in the capital hit a record high of 2,500 Thursday. Residents are being asked to stay home and bars and restaurants to close at 8 p.m. Health experts say stricter measures are needed, with some suggesting a full national lockdown. An Iraqi court has issued an arrest warrant for President Trump for killing militia chief Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes in the same targeted drone strike that killed top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani just over a year ago. The strike on Baghdad airport was ordered by Trump, who later said it had taken out 2 men for the price of 1. Earlier this week, Iran requested Interpol arrest Trump and other U.S. officials for Soleimani's assassination. Joe Biden has tapped Boston Mayor Marty Walsh for labor secretary. Walsh was a top union leader, heading up the Boston building trades before his career in politics and has the support of many prominent labor union figures. But others had hoped Biden would select another cabinet member of color, as several were reportedly up for consideration, including California Labor Secretary Julie Su, who's Asian American. If Walsh is confirmed, Boston City Council President Kim Janey, who's African American, will become acting mayor, making her the first woman and first person of color to serve as mayor of Boston. In other cabinet news, Biden selected Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo as Commerce Secretary. The Revolving Door Project said the choice was profoundly troubling, tweeting, quote, "Raimondo has a record of promoting fracking and cuts to public assistance programs, selling public pensions to Wall Street, and grossly mishandling Rhode Island's COVID-19 outbreak," they said. And Isabel Guzman has been nominated to head the U.S. Small Business Administration. She previously served in the same agency under Obama and is currently the director of California's Office of the Small Business Advocate. Guzman is the first Latina named to a cabinet-level post by Biden. She'll be involved in overseeing the implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program, a key part of the pandemic stimulus plan. Meanwhile, 2 members of Trump's cabinet have resigned in protest of Wednesday's failed coup attempt at the U.S. Capitol. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao said in a statement she was deeply troubled by the insurrection. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos called the events unconscionable and said they were a, quote, inflection point. Chao and DeVos have been members of Trump's cabinet since just after his inauguration in 2017. They're the 11th and 12th Trump administration officials to quit after Wednesday's attack on the Capitol. Boeing's agreed to pay more than $2.5 billion to settle nearly 2-year federal criminal investigation into Boeing's role in the 2 fatal crashes in Ethiopia and Indonesia that killed all 346 people on board 737 MAX airplanes. The Justice Department had accused Boeing of having concealed information about the aircraft. Michael Stumo, the father of Samia Rose Stumo, who died in the Ethiopian Airlines crash, told NPR, quote, "This is a Boeing protection agreement. There's nobody being held accountable personally," he said. And in Guatemala, the former security head of a Canadian-owned mine has been convicted for the 2009 assassination of Adolfo Ich, an indigenous Maya Quechua community leader and land protector. Minor Padilla pleaded guilty Wednesday in what the Guardian newspaper described was a rare conviction over human rights violations linked to Canadian mining corporations in Central America. Padilla worked in the region's largest nickel mine in eastern Guatemala, which at the time of Ich's killing was owned by Hudbay Minerals. Ich was a leading voice of resistance against the mine and its destruction of indigenous territory. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Calls are growing for President Trump to resign or be removed from office for inciting supporters to storm the Capitol in an act of insurrection Wednesday to disrupt the counting of Electoral College votes. The unrest left 5 people dead, including a Capitol police officer who was reportedly struck in the head by a fire extinguisher. On Thursday, White House aides pressured Trump to read a scripted video message prepared by a staff where he denounced the mob that stormed the Capitol and vowed there would be a smooth transition of power. The New York Times reports Trump only agreed to record the video after realizing he could be charged for his role in inciting the riots and facing the prospect of being removed from office. Just a day earlier, Trump had a very different message for the insurrectionists, saying, quote, "We love you. You're very special." The Times also reports Trump has had discussions in recent weeks with staff about pardoning himself before leaving office, a move no president has ever taken. On Thursday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi threatened to impeach the president again if Vice President Mike Pence and the cabinet does not invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him.
I joined the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the Vice President to remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment. If the Vice President and the Cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment.
On Thursday, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao both resigned from their offices, joining at least 10 other Trump administration officials to quit since Wednesday. The Wall Street Journal editorial page is urging Trump to resign. That's the Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal. Lawmakers are also vowing to investigate the massive security breach at the Capitol where rioters overwhelmed Capitol Police. Congressional leaders ousted the sergeants at arms of both the House and the Senate. The chief of the Capitol Police is also expected to resign next week. Multiple reports are emerging of police officers aiding the rioters by removing barricades, to giving out directions to offices of specific lawmakers, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who will become the Senate Majority Leader. To talk more about this, we're joined by Ro Khanna, Democratic congressmember from California, member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, was inside the Capitol Wednesday during the insurrection. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to Democracy Now! Where were you, and can you describe the scene personally from your vantage point?
Amy, I was in my office in the Cannon building, and then we heard that there was an evacuation because there was apparently a pipe bomb nearby. So I left my office. I started to head towards the Capitol. Fortunately, I got frantic texts from people saying, don't go into the Capitol. It is being overrun. At that point, some of us turned back. We were told that the Cannon building was clear, but we didn't know, but it was our best course. So I went to my office, locked the doors of the office, and stayed in the office the rest of the day.
So, Congressman Khanna, you have the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling for the removal of President Trump. Can you talk about the different options? Can you talk about what the 25th Amendment invocation would mean? Can you talk about what impeachment would look like?
Well, the 25th Amendment, Amy, is something that Vice President Pence can do. He just needs to get a majority of the cabinet on board, and they can ask that the president be removed, and Vice President Pence then can become president. If they refuse to do that, then the House must impeach, and the Senate should convict. Here's why Republicans should be for impeachment. If you listen to the president's incitement of violence and Rudy Giuliani's incitement of violence, the target was actually Republican lawmakers. Donald Trump Jr. is saying, go show the Republicans they need to be on our side, and we're going to have a trial by combat. So this was not an attack just on Democratic lawmakers. If anything, it was an incitement of violence against Republican lawmakers.
Inside the Capitol, as the marauders smashed their way in, as ultimately 5 people died. A woman apparently trying to get in through a window was shot, it looks like, by Capitol Police. Now a Capitol Police officer has succumbed to his injuries, apparently slammed in the head by a fire extinguisher, and 3 others who died of medical emergencies on the Capitol grounds. Describe the feeling inside. Did you ever expect this would happen? President Trump's whole family was at the rally. You had Ivanka Trump, you had Eric, you had Donald Trump calling for people to move forward. Trump said he would go with them to the Capitol. Of course, he didn't. And what that means, do you see him as the leader of the insurrection? And do you think he should be criminally charged? He's out of office in less than 2 weeks if he's not ousted before.
Well, it is a case of classic incitement. It is illegal conduct to encourage people to go break the law. And in this case, there was a direct connection. It's not like he made some generic call for protesting. What he said is go march at the Capitol. Rudy Giuliani is saying it's a trial by combat. He's saying go show strength. This is basically an incitement of a mob to go commit criminal attacks. And so it absolutely needs to be investigated from a Justice Department perspective. But the first thing is he needs to be removed from office. I don't understand how you can have a president of the United States who has incited a violent attack remain in office any longer.
Do you support impeachment or the invoking of the 25th Amendment?
I support both. I mean, I support whatever will get him out. What I don't understand is why you can't have McConnell call him and say, President Trump, if you don't resign, you're going to be impeached. And that is necessary not just for the stability of our democracy until Joe Biden gets into office. That's necessary to send a message that in this country, you cannot incite riots and have no consequences. I mean, what does it say to people if we have a president of the United States who's incited violence against the institution of the Capitol, and we say we're fine with him still being president of this country? That is not a message that stands up for democratic values. Contrast
this with President Trump's approach in Portland, Oregon, when he called for people put in jail for up to 10 years if they in any way damaged federal property. Here, as we saw people smashing the windows of the Capitol, climbing through those windows, you have President Trump safely at the White House saying, "We love you."
Well, his speech was reminiscent of Mark Antony's speech and Julius Caesar, minus Shakespeare's rhetorical genius, where he was basically manipulating people saying, okay, go home. But really the thrust of the speech was, we love you, we support you, I support what you're doing. And it was further inciting this violence. But you're right, Amy, to point out the racial disparity. I mean, I don't think there's a person in this country who believes that there were thousands of Black Lives Matter protesters or black protesters there, that the response wouldn't have been dramatically different. And that is something this country really needs to grapple with, the disparity in which we looked at white protesters for Trump and the way we looked at many African-American protesters during this summer who were protesting for racial justice.
Forget thousands of Black Lives Matter activists. If 12 announced they were going to march on the Capitol and they were going to storm it, not to mention just protest in front of it, I dare say there would be a massive response. And that goes to the question, I mean, this wasn't like a flash mob where suddenly, you know, these people emerged. President Trump had been calling for this for weeks. The mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, already had written a letter to the Pentagon asking for the National Guard to come in. How is it possible that the Capitol Police were not only so completely unprepared, but actually we see the high-fiving, we see the selfies, we see the removal of the barricades, ushering people in. Now you have the resignation of the chief of the Capitol Police and the ousting of the sergeants of arms of both the Senate and the House.
Well, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. I agree with you that the Capitol Police acted in a way that was completely unprepared, and these incidents of taking selfies and letting people in are very troubling. I do think we need to acknowledge that there were a lot of first-line responders and police officers who I personally saw who were doing the right thing, who were risking their own lives to protect people in the Capitol. But the leadership was totally derelict. They did not have a plan. They did not take the proper precautions. And of course, Washington, D.C. was restricted. It's why we needed to become a state, because they couldn't invoke the National Guard. The final point, Emily, is that social media really needs to be looked at. This whole attack was being planned on Parler. People were actually talking about how they were going to get rifles. They were talking in specifics about what they were going to do. And nothing came down on those sites. And then Facebook and Twitter were live streaming the calls to go march on the Capitol. So I think social media has to really probably one of its most shameful days in contributing to what happened on the Capitol.
And you have the newly sworn-in Democratic Congressmember Cori Bush of Missouri tweeting, "My first resolution in Congress will be to call for the expulsion of the Republican members of Congress who incited this domestic terror attack on the Capitol." This is Cori Bush speaking on MSNBC Wednesday.
I'm walking through from the Capitol to my office, and there was not a lot of police activity. There was no one came to this door to check and knocked on the door to say, Congressman Bush, are you and your team okay? We're sending text messages letting people know. I'm letting, our committees know we're okay, letting our other members know we're okay. Something had to happen, because I tell you what, the National Guard, when they were called to Ferguson or any other part in St. Louis, that was not a thing. We didn't have to wait to find out that was happening. Oftentimes that happened even when it was said that we were having a protest. So I don't understand how this happened like this. I don't understand how we were put in this position in our place of business. Our lives were at risk today.
That's Missouri Congressmember Cori Bush. And I'm wondering, Congressmember Khanna, if you are among the lawmakers who are demanding the resignation of Republican Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, blaming them for helping instigate the violent mob of Trump supporters that stormed the Capitol. Cruz and Hawley were at the forefront of the efforts objecting to the certification of the electoral votes for President-elect Joe Biden. Congressmembers Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted yesterday, Senator Cruz, you must accept responsibility for how your craven, self-serving actions contributed to the deaths of 4 people yesterday and how you fundraised off this riot. Both you and Senator Hawley must resign. If you do not, the Senate should move for your expulsion. Unquote. Meanwhile, publishing company Simon & Schuster said Thursday it's canceling the publication of an upcoming book by Senator Hawley. And Senator Hawley's home newspaper, the Kansas City Star, has said he has blood on his hands. Even after everything happened, Hawley insisted on continuing to object to the counts in Pennsylvania, for example. Your response?
Well, Amy, I think what Hawley did is unconscionable. I mean, he actually was out there with a fist pump supporting and encouraging directly the protesters. And so resignation in that sense makes complete sense. And there should be an ethics investigation. I think there has to be a distinction between members of Congress, as much as I disagreed with them, who used the process to raise objections, and they should be defeated at the ballot box. But if there were senators like Hawley who are actually inciting violence, that breaks all ethics laws, and that is the grounds for expulsion. And that fact-based investigation should take place. In Hawley's case, I think it's clear and evident.
Finally, through all of this, it almost became a sideshow. But Wednesday began and ended with history being made in Georgia. The first African-American Democrat elected to the Senate from the South, Reverend Raphael Warnock. That was the beginning in the early hours. And then you had, in the midst of all of this, the announcement that that John Ossoff had won the second seat in Georgia, flipping the U.S. Senate to being Democrat-led, at least 50-50. And, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris will be the deciding vote. What does that mean for you in the House and the kind of legislation you want to see put forward?
It's absolutely historic. We now can get things done, like a $15 minimum wage, like a major infrastructure bill, like $2,000 cash for people who need it. This is a moment now that we have to deliver for the American people whose wages have stagnated, who have not had good, secure jobs. But more than that, Amy, is it's a step after all this country has gone through towards a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. We have a new South with Reverend Warnock, not just an African-American senator from the South, but an African-American senator who ran talking about criminal justice, who ran talking about human rights in Palestine, who ran talking about issues of economic dignity. It is a new voice for this country, and I am hopeful that we're going to turn a page after Donald Trump and start the serious work of building that kind of a democracy.
Rokan, I want to thank you for being with us. California Democrat, a congressmember from Silicon Valley, member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Next up, we look at President-elect Joe Biden's pick to head the Justice Department, Merrick Garland. Yep, the judge who Republicans denied a seat on the Supreme Court 5 years ago. Stay with us.
Every night in my dreams, I see you, I feel you.
Celine Dion singing My Heart Will Go On, the theme song to the Titanic. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. President-elect Joe Biden's formally nominated Judge Merrick Garland for Attorney General. Garland's a centrist judge who was President Obama's pick to serve on the Supreme Court after the death of Antonin Scalia in 2016. But his nomination stalled after Republican senators, led by Mitch McConnell, refused to put it up for a vote. Garland served on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals for over 2 decades, previously worked at the Justice Department, where he prosecuted the Oklahoma City bombing case. On Thursday, Merrick Garland cited the insurrection at the Capitol as he talked about the rule of law.
As everyone who watched yesterday's events in Washington now understands, if they did not understand before, the rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike, that there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for friends, another for foes, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity.
Biden's other picks for top posts at the Justice Department include Vanita Gupta to be Associate Attorney General, currently head of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights.
Now is the time to ensure that our economic system works for everyone, that we can protect the health and safety of all of the American people, and that we will harness all of the Justice Department's levers for civil rights, justice and police reform, and climate justice, and so much more.
And Joe Biden has nominated Kristen Clark, the head of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, to be Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights.
I stand here today deeply inspired by the example of the late Thurgood Marshall, Constance Baker Motley, and other public servants who dedicated their lives to advancing the cause of justice. We are at a crossroads. If I am fortunate enough to be confirmed, we will turn the page on hate and close the door on discrimination by enforcing our federal civil rights laws.
To talk more about President-elect Joe Biden's picks to run the Justice Department, we're joined by Elie Mystal, the nation's justice correspondent, author of the magazine's monthly column Objection. I mean, what an unusual day, Elie. You have this aftermath of the insurrection on Wednesday, and as the death toll grew to 5, you have Joe Biden coming out and announcing who would be the Attorney General and the other picks for the Justice Department. Again, you were tweeting up a storm about both. Can you respond to his choices and also what happened in the nation's capital?
For Attorney General was going to be his most consequential cabinet pick before the President of the United States appears to have launched a failed coup against his own government, right? Merrick Garland's pick was huge before the events of this week. I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the Garland pick. People need to remember that Garland was picked for the Supreme Court because he was a compromise candidate. He was picked to entice Republican votes to confirm him. Now, people have forgotten why he was a centrist and why he was a compromise candidate, because the Republicans martyred him, over the Scalia replacement. And so he's gotten this kind of like cult status. But this is a centrist jurist who has a history, a troubling history to me, of being deferential to police and being unwilling to hold police accountable for acts of brutality and misconduct. Now, people change, right? I'm basing my information on his actual written opinions from his long career, but that was before Trump, right? That was before the events of this week even. So Merrick Garland's going to have an opportunity to prove me wrong, and to prove that he's learned and evolved, because to link it up with what we've seen this week, by the time Merrick Garland takes control of the Justice Department, many of the domestic terrorists that we saw this week will have not been brought to justice, right? Very few of them will have been arrested. Very few of them will have been charged. Merrick Garland will have an opportunity, will have a target-rich environment to show that he is willing to put the rule of law and to take these people on head-on and seriously, right? We will not have charged Donald Trump Jr. for incitement to a riot, as he did in that speech when he stood there for 2 minutes and yelled, "Fight for Trump, fight for Trump, fight for Trump," right before they stormed the Capitol. Don Trump Jr. will not have been charged by the time Merrick Garland takes control, all right? Rudy Giuliani, who instructed these people to go out and have a trial by combat, will not have been charged by the time Merrick Garland takes control. So if he wants to prove that he is ready to apply the rule of law equally, he will have multiple opportunities to do so as of January 20th.
So talk about the other members of the team and how much power they have. We just interviewed the now head, if she is approved, the head of the Civil Rights Division, who Joe Biden had nominated, not to mention, that's Kristen Clark, not to mention Vanita Gupta. Will post both of those interviews recently. Their significance, and will these even departments be revived? Talk about what's happened to them.
It's a great team, I think, writ large. Kristen Clark is one of the best. I think she will be great at the Civil Rights Division. Vanita Gupta, I mean, look, in all else being equal, Vanita Gupta is on my personal short list for the Supreme Court. Like, I think she is that kind of serious and important person. So I'm very happy with the team. When you talk about the kind of power they have, that's going to have a lot to do with Garland himself. The fact that they were all announced together, which doesn't always happen, suggests that department will work hand in hand, hand in glove, perhaps is a better analogy for that. So I have hope that they will have real power, real authority to, and I think you put it exactly right, restore divisions of the Justice Department that have atrophied or in some cases willingly been dismantled by Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions. Take the Civil Rights Division, for instance. One of the main ways the federal government has for imposing standards on local police is through the use of something called consent decrees. The Justice Department investigates you to avoid federal charges. Your jurisdiction, your police department enters in a consent decree with the Justice Department to meet certain standards in terms of, good policing ideals. Jeff Sessions famously ended the use of consent decrees within his first couple of weeks in office. I would assume that Kristen Clark will restore the use of consent decrees within her first 100 hours in office, right? So the atrophying and the willful dismantling of some of the structures of the Justice Department, I do have hope will be restored under this team. But again, the issue here is not restoration is great. It's important to bring the Justice Department to wash clean the stains of Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions from the Justice Department. That's all well and good. But this moment demands more than mere restoration. This moment demands a Justice Department who is willing to go after the people who threaten our democracy and who openly threaten the safety of Black people in this country. And Merrick Garland will have an opportunity to prove that he is willing to do that.
And then you have the speculation that if, in fact, he is approved by the Senate, now a Democratic Senate, you'll have his open seat on the federal bench, the possibility that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will fill that seat and then possibly be nominated to the Supreme Court if there is an opening.
Yeah, so here's the thing about the D.C. Circuit. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but the D.C. Circuit, which is where Garland currently sits, is basically like the feeder circuit for the Supreme Court. A lot of Supreme Court justices kind of got their start on the D.C. Circuit, currently on the Supreme Court. John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, and Brett Kavanaugh all came from the D.C. Circuit. Ruth Bader Ginsburg came from the D.C. Circuit. It's a feeder, it's the Alabama to the NFL, right? Well, the D.C. Circuit is not nothing. Yeah. So yes, putting Judge Jackson on the D.C. Circuit is not only great for Judge Jackson, she's a great judge, and great for the D.C. Circuit. It's a suggestion that you are being groomed to fill a seat on the Supreme Court should an opening come up. So that's great. That's important. I'll point out that that people making this big and so see, there's three-dimensional chess for Judge Garland was old enough that he could have taken senior status and thus opened up the seat on the D.C. Circuit anyway. So the argument that the really good thing about making Garland AG is that he's opened up this. That doesn't really hold up.
So
all right, it's great that Biden will have the opportunity to put another judge on the D.C. Circuit. That's awesome. That didn't have to be this way. Biden wanted it to be this way. Didn't have to be this way.
Ellie, just before we go, we just have 30 seconds. From the Washington Post today, time will tell whether the takeover of Capitol was a riot, a last gasp of a renegade president, or an early skirmish in a civil war. And your new piece for The Nation is headlined, The Confederacy Finally Stormed the Capitol. The significance of this week.
What we saw this week was, Frederick Douglass said, power never concedes anything without a demand. And what we saw this week was power not conceding, all right? White supremacists have never conceded defeat, not once, not ever in the history of this country. And we have to always be ready to fight them. Because when we are not ready, when we are not prepared, this is what happens.
Ellie Misto, I want to thank you for being with us, Nation's Justice correspondent, author of the Nation's monthly column, Objection. We'll link to your latest piece. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, speaking of storming, a data scientist from Florida, Rebecca Jones, her home is raided by authorities in Florida. We'll find out why it was guns were put to the family of this data scientist, and she had to move as she talked about information about Florida's COVID-19 outbreak, now reaching a peak. Stay with us. Show some respect by Tina Turner. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the United States reported more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths in one day for the first time on Thursday, Florida broke the record for the highest single-day increase in new cases, with nearly 20,000 new cases reported in one day. In Daytona Beach, hundreds of senior citizens who were determined to get vaccinated against COVID-19 have been camping out in their cars overnight in cold weather. They've had to scramble to get a place in line for the vaccine after the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, issued an executive order defying the CDC and giving priority to not those over 75, but those over 65, 10 years lower than the CDC recommended age, meaning older Floridians have to compete with those who are younger. Those who are 79 years and older are reportedly 4 times as likely to die from COVID. So we caught up with a couple who are 79 and 80, John and Maria Luisa Schock. They were in line for 2 days. The first night For 5 hours, they got there at 1 in the morning and returned back. And the second day, it took 19 hours. They arrived at 7, got their shot about 1 in the afternoon the next day. John described what happened the first night they tried to get vaccinated.
Yeah, the thing was they were parking in the parkage. We had this line about 1.5 miles long, and we were towards the tail end of it, unfortunately. And they only have 1,000 vaccines each day. And so once they filled the parking lot, then they shut the gate off. And we were at the tail end on Monday, so that's what happened to us.
So John and Maria Luisa Schacht came back a second night. At the time we spoke to them, they'd been in line for 14 hours. We talked to them just after 9 in the morning. They'd been there since 7 the night before. They had rented a van this time so they could sustain the amount of time. Again, they are 79 and 80 years old. And John described how they made a camp toilet to use during their wait.
Well, it made it a little easier to use a 5-gallon bucket with a toilet seat purchased at Dick's Sporting Goods set on top. Yeah, it made it a little easier with and then you put a bag in there, so, then you can do whatever you want, I guess.
So
that worked out okay.
So you're hoping to get the shot?
Oh yeah, we'll be able to get vaccinated. But it's just too bad we had to come 14 hours ahead of time to do it.
Are there many older people like you, people in your 80s?
I see a number of them, yeah. Yeah, I do.
Why is the shot important to you, John, to you and Maria Luisa, your wife?
Well, we have to protect ourselves and protect others, and it's part of the whole thing. Where, the more people can get vaccinated, the sooner we can properly address the pandemic so that we can get back to normal. So, yeah, it's very important because we don't want to come down with this thing, and then it would contribute not to if we did, it would be bad for us and it would be bad for others.
So that's John Schacht. Again, they are waiting in this massive line, overall waited for over 24 hours, because the governor dropped the age from 75, what the CDC recommended, to 65. So it's kind of survival of the fittest out there. This comes as DeSantis got into a heated exchange with CNN reporter Rosa Flores this week when she questioned him about the chaotic rollout of the vaccines in the states that forced the senior citizens into these unbelievably long lines. DeSantis had previously said he would prioritize them for vaccination.
My full question is, what went wrong with the rollout of the vaccine when we've seen phone lines jammed, websites crashing?
So you're repeating your question.
To complete it for you, Governor, we've seen websites crash and also senior citizens waiting overnight for the vaccine.
Where was that at?
We've seen it in Duval, Broward, Orange, and Lee County.
And why was, in Lee, why did that happen? Did you investigate why?
That's my question to you, Governor. You're the governor of the state. I'm not the governor of the state.
Okay, but you didn't investigate why that happened in Lee County. Why was there a big line? Did you investigate why?
Could you tell us why?
Because we distributed vaccine to hospitals, and the hospital said, first come, first serve. If you show up, we'll do it. So they didn't use a registration system. There wasn't anything that was done, and there's a lot of demand for it. So people are going to want to go ahead and get it. So are you saying there was no plan
then from the state to make sure that senior citizens didn't wait outside overnight?
So the state is not dictating to hospitals we're not dictating to Carlos Magoya how he runs his operations here. That would be a total disaster. These guys are much more competent to be able to deliver healthcare services than a state government could ever be.
He's not telling the whole story there. Florida Governor DeSantis was the one who dropped the age from 75 to 65, not giving the senior citizens like John and Maria Luisa priority so that they didn't have to wait day after day. And many are infirm and could not He also prompted outrage in December when armed police raided the home of data scientist Rebecca Jones, who was forced to resign in May as the lead software developer for Florida's coronavirus data portal after she refused to censor information about Florida's COVID-19 outbreak. Police seized her computers, pointed guns at her children. Jones posted video of the raid on Twitter.
Police, come down now! Bring your children!
My children!
Hang on, let me clear the house.
He just pointed a gun at my children!
Rebecca Jones accused Florida's Governor DeSantis of sending the Gestapo after her. She wrote on Twitter, quote, "This is what happens to scientists who do their job honestly. This is what happens to people who speak truth to power," unquote. Florida authorities said the raid was part of a probe into a recent hack of the Florida's Health Department's website, but Jones said she hasn't had access to the site in 6 months. Rebecca Jones joins us now from her new home out of state. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Rebecca. I'm so sorry for what you went through. Can you tell us more about how the police raided your home?
Yeah, there's actually, excuse me, a 23-minute video that I recorded up until the moment that the police shut it off, where they go through the process that led to them coming into my house with military-grade weapons pointed at my small children. And essentially what happened was that the Department of Health told the police, hey, somebody sent a text message to some of our employees telling them to tell the truth and speak out. And here's the IP address where it came from. Of course, Department of Health would know what my IP address is because I've worked remotely for them for more than 2 years. And the Florida Department of Law Enforcement took the IP address and found out who it belonged to, and then came and took my computers, my external hard drives, thumb drives, devices that aren't even capable of sending any kind of text or email because they're just storage devices. Of course, those had evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the state, but they were just backups. So, of course, I have the originals. And my cell phone. And I was kind of just in disbelief, you know, when the police released their video of them coming in with their guns raised. One pointed about 6 inches from my face. I asked them if they were looking for a person the way that they came into the house. I had no idea what was happening. I had no idea what that message that was sent was said until that day. And it was disturbing to have that happen to you for literally doing nothing other than reporting data.
So, Rebecca Jones, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you were talking about as a Florida data scientist working for the state and why you were forced to leave. We're speaking on the day after a record-breaking day. And as you know, these lines of thousands trying to get vaccinations, the most vulnerable having to wait in line for days.
Yeah, DeSantis has decided to buck the CDC recommendations in several different ways. He forced schools to return back to face-to-face this week, even with the B.1.1.7 variant out there, which is particularly effective at infecting children. And the state has been dodging releasing information at every opportunity. They had to be sued to release deaths from long-term care facilities, which they have not updated in 3 weeks. And it took a long time for me to finally be able to force the state to report school cases at all. And it's from the beginning, this is the situation that we're seeing with the vaccine rollout is almost a parallel to what happened in the early months at DOH when I was working there. I actually notified my superiors on January 24th of last year that we needed to be on top of this. We needed to be setting up surveillance systems. We needed to have a data repository and public information tool that was easy to digest for any range of, technology expertise. And I was told that we didn't need it for weeks, and then that it would just cause a panic for weeks. And then finally, when the governor declared a state of an emergency on March 12th, I was given permission to build all these data systems, and I had 2 hours to do it, and give people the information that I thought was most important. And our site was internationally celebrated. Even Dr. Deborah Birx went around telling everybody to go to it. DeSantis even announced that it was the public face of our response, and it became the template and the model for other states to report.
So what wasn't the governor allowing you to report?
So I'm actually not a software developer. I'm a geographer. So we track, as geographers, all kinds of Earth and human interactions. My specialty is in climate. And I've been working for the Department of Health for several years in the disease control department, looking at mostly environmental hazards, but also hepatitis A, influenza. So this wasn't my first epidemiology work. And I thought that there was a lot of important information that we needed to release. It took a long time for us to be able to release racial data. Only after President Trump said we should all do it were we allowed to release it. I nagged forever for us to be able to add the testing site locations to our databases and allow people to easily find where they can get tested, and I was told no. I begged essentially for us to be able to add hospitalization data because that is one of the most crucial elements of surveillance that we have, and was told no. I wanted to add long-term care facility data and was told no. So repeatedly, we had to release basically the bare minimum of information that I had initially designed until we were forced to add it. And when May came around and the state decided to open without consulting any of the epidemiology team, they consulted business people. And they asked us to come up with the metrics and a way to measure the metrics and to have it added to our data systems and our dashboard in 2 days. And we did. It was miraculous, but we did. And the supposedly data-driven plan that DeSantis had made was actually being printed and stapled right in front of me when I went to present the findings of the analysis for the first time. They had never seen it before, but the plan was already done. And I don't know if it was ignorance of what was going on or people being sycophants who wanted to please DeSantis and deliver, or a combination of both, or DeSantis's orders himself. But the analysis did not match what that already made plan said. And so the leadership that was in charge decided to start changing the way we measured things, changing the way that we reported, trying to move the goalpost, exempting rural counties from the criteria altogether.
Which, of course, would mean that the numbers would be lower. And you have DeSantis, a very close ally of President Trump, who's now made his home in Florida at Mar-a-Lago. We only have a minute. And, Rebecca, I wanted to get to this final point that you were forced to essentially move out of state after this police raid in December. And you just tweeted, as you're arriving in Washington, D.C., I left my home in Florida to escape a tyrannical governor who sent police to raid my home for publishing COVID stats, only to arrive in D.C. as armed terrorists storm Congress, trying to overturn the election by threatening to hold Congress hostage. What has that been like for you in this last 30 seconds?
I start to feel that trouble just follows me, or I follow it no matter where I go, which is actually, I think, the first line of my book. But yeah, it just seems like we're in a world that's in disarray. Everything is discombobulated, and no one seems to want to take responsibility for how their actions have impacted our society and our culture and our politics. And it is pervasive. It is everywhere. It's here in D.C., it's in Florida, it's at the highest levels of government, literally, in this country. And I'm just in shock that everywhere in this country is experiencing this kind of sickness of the soul.
Rebecca Jones, we're going to have to leave it there, but we will continue to talk to you, we hope, in the future. Founder of Florida COVID Action, data scientist and whistleblower. I'm Amy Goodman. Stay safe, wear a mask. Wearing a mask is an act of love.